We have Parijat Dey, who's going to talk to us about imprints of the sitter locality in conformal field theory. So go ahead, Parijat.
Thank you. So I should begin by thanking the organizers for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So this is my first time in Cambridge. And today I'm going to talk about how de Sitter locality can be obtained from conformal field theory. So this is mainly going to be based on the ideas of conformal field theory, specifically the conformal bootstrap. And this is based on some recent work which appeared a few months back with Zhongji Huang, who is currently at Beijing KITP, and Arthur Lipstein, who is at Durham University. So let's begin by this slide. I think all of us are familiar with the idea of ADS CFT, but to keep everybody on the same page, let's refresh our memory. So the idea of ADS CFT is that it relates quantum gravity theory in asymptotically ADS background to conformal field theory that lives on the boundary of the ADS. So this is a holographic duality, and it relates a gravitational theory to a non-gravitational conformal field theory. And it has been successfully worked for many different systems, and we can use it to get different results. So for example, we can study strongly coupled quantum field theory using the gravity theory, and also we can reconstruct quantum gravity theory from the dual bulk theory. So this is a picture of ADS. So this cylinder is like a ADS space, and the boundary is a conformal field theory. Time runs along this direction. Okay, good. So now, having said this, it is important to mention that we do not live in ADS space-time. We live in de Sitter space-time, which is solution to Einstein's equation with a positive cosmological constant. And why do we care about de Sitter? So de Sitter space is a model for the evolution of the accelerated universe. So it is important to understand quantum field theory in So it is important to understand quantum field theory in de Sitter background to understand the formation of the universe. However, there are some difficulties in understanding de Sitter space-time. So the de Sitter background is a time-dependent background, and we do not have a globally defined time-like Killing vector. So things are different. So usually when we are in Minkowski or flat space-time, we study scattering amplitudes. So we have a state which is at far past, and we compute the correlation function of in-out states, and this gives us the scattering amplitudes. But the definition of asymptotic regime, which is relevant for scattering experiments, is not directly applicable when we have de Sitter. So when we have de Sitter, we have to be careful in what we are doing. So it is not obvious at all to study quantum field theory in de Sitter, unlike Minkowski background. Now let's go back to ADS CFT. So one of the earliest triumphs of ADS CFT was given to us by the Hemskirk, Penidonis, Polchinski, and Sully in 2009. So this is the paper, so this is the abstract, and what this tells us is that the bulk locality in ADS can be derived from crossing symmetry of CFT correlators. So specifically, they have some abstract CFT. They use the idea of conformal bootstrap to derive the bulk locality. And here I should mention one line from the abstract is that any CFT with a large N expansion and a large gap has a local bulk dual. So this was the conjecture, and how does this work? So the derivation of bulk locality from crossing symmetry of CFT correlator works in this following way. So suppose we have we want to calculate the 4-point correlation function in ADS. So we start with a basic ADS Lagrangian, and we write down all possible terms in the action consistent with the symmetries. And then we calculate the boundary 4-point correlation function using the bulk local interactions in ADS. And on the other side, we can calculate the same correlator using conformal field theory, specifically by bootstrapping the dual CFT. So this is an abstract CFT. It does not care about any Lagrangian and any details of the theory. So these two computations can be done independently, and what they have shown is that the solution of crossing equation, or the solution to the conformal bootstrap equation, is in one-to-one correspondence with the effective actions that we have here. So this is like a counting problem. So they map the solutions to the bootstrap equation to the solution to the number of effective bulk vertices. Okay. So now the question we ask is, can bulk locality in de Sitter be derived from CFT? So since the organizers have asked to highlight some important questions, here are some that I would like to mention. So we know that de Sitter and Euclidean anti-de Sitter are related by analytic continuation. So we can go from one to other by this specific analytic continuation. So the question one can ask is, can the features of ADS CFT dictionary lead to a dual field theory? So it can be a conformal field theory, can be a field theory without conformal symmetry. But the question is it possible to have a dual description after doing this similar analytic continuation? However, we know that ADS and DS, there are important differences, and we expect that there should be some unfamiliar consequences of de Sitter and field theory correspondence. So, motivated by these questions, we will specifically ask these questions today. So we will ask if it is possible to understand the de Sitter correlators from the CFT perspective, just by studying the bootstrap constraints. And I will talk about what do I mean by de Sitter's correlators in a bit. And then if the answer is yes, if we can construct some correlation functions that can be related to de Sitter correlators, then the next question is, can we reconstruct a bulk scalar effective field theory in de Sitter space from its in-in correlators? So in-in correlators are specific correlators in de Sitter that we study. I will mention what we mean by this in details. And so basically we will try to see if there is a correspondence between this, and for today's talk we will be focusing on 4-dimensional de Sitter space and 3-dimensional conformal field theory. So when we talk about the CFT side, we will study this from the boundary perspective, and when we talk about the de Sitter, this is the bulk perspective, and we will try to address if this is a possible scenario. Okay? Yes.
Is it a future boundary CFT?
Yes.
And the bulk field theory?
Exactly.
Why would you expect that there's a duality?
We do not. We will see. So that's a.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. In what sense that you want to show that this locality holds?
Yes.
What is the signature of this?
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to compare the formal function boundary side and some
Yes.
written diagrams?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, it will become clear what we compute exactly in the bulk side and the boundary side in a bit, but this is roughly the idea, yes.
I mean, the structure will be the same, or
What do you mean by the structure?
like the formal function structure, the same as the you compare the hidden term, what you compare?
We compare 4-point correlation functions from the CFT side and from the bulk side. So, okay, so yeah, so here is a brief summary of my talk. So this is how we proceed. So we start from a scalar effective action in de Sitter. So we write down a consistent action with all possible terms, consistent with symmetry, with 4 points.
Patch you use?
Sorry?
What patch would you use in the de Sitter?
What patch? Okay, it's Poincaré patch.
A study patch or
Poincaré.
Poincaré?
And then we will map this de Sitter action to an effective action in Euclidean ADS. So it turns out that when we map this from de Sitter to Euclidean ADS, we end up getting double number of scalar fields because of the in formalism, because of the Schwingal-Keldy's formalism, we have some time-ordered contour and anti-time ordered contour. I will explain this in details. So we start from one scalar field theory and we end up getting a Euclidean action with double number of scalar field theory. So then we study the boundary of this Euclidean ADS. So we have the CFT of dual of this theory, and then we impose crossing symmetry to bootstrap these CFT correlators. And what we will show is that crossing symmetry is not enough to constrain the correlation functions. So all crossing symmetry allows like many mode solutions to the effective field theory in de Sitter, but only a subset of those constraints are relevant if we want to reconstruct the de Sitter action. So this is the thing, and then with this additional constraints, we can reconstruct the bulk scalar field theory in de Sitter. So this is what we will discuss in detail. Okay, so here is a brief outline of my talk. So to orient ourselves, we will start with the ideas of holography from CFT, how this works, and then we will go to Mellin space. So we will study the conformal bootstrap equations in Mellin space, and we will see how this Mellin space techniques dramatically simplifies the computation, and ADS locality can be derived from CFT Mellin space. Then we will move on to the main part of my talk, which is how do we bootstrap these correlators. And finally, we will talk about how bulk locality can be obtained after we have these bootstrap results. And finally, we will end with some questions and future directions. Okay, so let's start from the idea of holography from CFT. So to orient ourselves, we will just give a brief review of CFT basics. So conformal field theory are specified by an infinite set of local operators. So we have heard some of these ideas in the discussion session a couple of days back. So these local operators in conformal field theory are specified by the scaling dimensions delta and the spin L. So these are the quantum numbers in a conformal field theory. And product of two local operators can be written as an infinite sum over other operators. So this is schematically, we have products of O1 and O2. This is an infinite sum, and in CFT, this is a convergent expression. So the coefficient that sits here, C12 delta, so these coefficients are known as the OP coefficients. So these two numbers, the scaling dimensions and the OP coefficients, so these numbers are known as the CFT data. So if we can compute all of the scaling dimensions and the OP coefficients in a theory, we can completely specify the CFT. So the goal of any bootstrap CFT program is to find the CFT data. Now the power of CFT lies in the fact that it completely fixes the lower point correlation function, and the first non-trivial dynamical information arises in its 4-point correlation function. So we have 4 scalar operators inserted at 4 different points, and it turns out that this correlation function can be written as a function of 2 variables, u and v. So they are known as cross ratios. So this is how the cross ratios are defined. So these are conformally invariant ratios. And
Here you would consider a fully flat space or arbitrary space.
this one, this is a pure flat CFT. This is a flat space. Yeah. So this function GUV, this admits an expansion in conformal blocks. So this is how it looks like. So this this function small g, these functions are known as the conformal blocks, and the functional form of this function are fixed from symmetry. So the closed form expression is not known in in every dimensions. However, some in even dimensions there are some expressions for the conformal blocks, and for our purpose we will be working in 3-dimensional CFT. So we have some recursion relations by Simon Caron-Hoare, which computes the conformal blocks in terms of the 2-dimensional conformal blocks. So we will be using that. And we also have some numbers over here, A, which is also leveled by the scaling dimension and the spin. So these are square of the OP coefficient. So in this expression, the CFT data lies here and in here. So the dynamical information is here in this conformal block expansion. Now, once we have the 4-point correlation function, we can fuse operators using different OPE. So we can fuse operator 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So this is known as the S-channel expansion of the correlator. We can also expand this in the T-channel where we fuse 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. And the associativity of operator product expansion tells us that these 2 expansion must be the same. So this is the statement of crossing symmetry, which is the equality of S-channel and T-channel. Now, this equation can be written in a compact form in terms of conformal blocks, which is this one. So this is the conformal bootstrap equation. So the left side we have the S-channel expansion of the correlator, and on the right we have the T-channel expansion. So you can go from S-channel to T-channel by interchanging the cross ratios U and V. And this delta phi over here is the scaling dimension of the correlators that we are considering. So this is a functional constraint on the CFT data, delta and A. So the idea is to solve this bootstrap equation and compute the values of delta and A. But as you can see, this equation looks very complicated. It involves a double infinite summation. So it involves a summation over all the spins in the spectrum, and it also involves a summation over the scaling dimension, which itself is an unknown. So the bottom line is that we cannot directly solve this equation and compute the CFT data. So we have to use some approximations. Now, this equation analytically can be solved if we assume that there is a perturbative parameter in the CFT, and we can expand the CFT data in the parameter. So for the case of the paper that I mentioned in the beginning, so they consider this specific CFT. So they consider a CFT with only one scalar field phi. And this CFT contains double trace primary operators. So you have two field phi, and you have a bunch of derivatives in between. So these are known as the double trace operators, and it is labeled by two numbers n, which runs from 0 to infinity with integer values, and L, which is the spin of this operator. Now, this is a very specific CFT, and we have already assumed that there is a large parameter in the CFT. So, we expand the CFT data in this large parameter, and for this case, this parameter is a central charge. So, this is the scaling dimension of these double trace operators. This is the generalized free theory value. So, we expand about the free theory, and this is the correction to the scaling dimension at the first order in the perturbative expansion. So, this gamma is known as the anomalous dimension. And here we also have the expansion of the OPE coefficient. So, this is the free value of the OPE coefficient, and this is the correction. Now, what we do is we plug this value in the bootstrap equation. So, we expand both sides in 1 over C and solve order by order. So, it can be solved, and what they did, they solved it, and they had a recursion relation for this anomalous dimension. And the question then is, can these solutions reconstruct the bulk ADS dual? So, what is the bulk perspective? So, we consider a bulk massive scalar field in the bulk ADS background. So, this is the bulk action, and this is the scalar, this is the potential, and we are considering this ADS. So, this is the ADS metric in Poincare. So, this potential V phi, we just assume that this we assume that there is a Z2 symmetry. So, we will keep only terms with a Z2 even, and then we see what are the possible terms that we can add consistent with symmetries. And the mass of the scalar field phi is related to the scaling dimension of the boundary CFT operator in this way. So, here is a bulk quartic action. So, let us write down the independent bulk vortices one by one. So, here is a first term, which is a quartic term without a derivative, phi to the 4, and we have some coefficient, this is a coupling. So, at 0 derivative level, this is the only term we can have. Then we go to the next independent term is at the 4th derivative level, which is this, and here we can use the equation of motions and integration by parts to rule out the terms that are not independent. So, this is the 4th derivative term, this is the 6th derivative term, and so on. So, we can have an expansion in terms of the number of derivatives. Now, with these different bulk vortices, we can compute the correlation function, the boundary correlation function, and try to match it with the CFT results. Okay, so this is how it works. So, we compute the correlation function using the bulk Witten diagrams. So, we have for each of these interactions, we have one particular Witten diagram, we compute the correlator, and then we try to match it with the CFT results. So, here is one example of the Witten diagram. So, this is for phi to the 4 interaction. So, we want to calculate this correlator with 4 points inserted on the boundary, and this is a phi to the 4 bulk vortex. So, this can be computed, and this will give you the D functions that we get from the bulk. So, we have to compute this bulk to, we know the bulk to boundary to bulk Witten propagator, and we do the integration, and this we end up getting the D functions. And once we have this expression in terms of this D function, the next step is to decompose this correlator in conformal blocks and extract the CFT data. Now, with these interactions that we have in the bulk, we can have truncated solution on the CFT side. So, for example, this interaction 5 to the 4, it destroys and creates 2 particle states of spin 0. So one can show that with this bulk interaction, we can have intermediate states with spin 0. So no other spin states are allowed. And we can count the bulk interaction according to the maximum spin that they can couple to. So what does this mean from the CFT side is that we have this spectrum of CFT over here, and this anomalous dimension is truncated. So we truncate this solution up to a certain number, capital L. So this capital L is related to what we have on the bulk interaction. So now the bootstrap equation becomes simpler with this spin truncated case. So we have now one finite sum over the spins, and this can be solved in the large C expansion, which results in a recursion relation for the anomalous dimension. And once we have the solution, we can count the number of solutions to crossing at with the maximum spin capital L. So there is a flat space S matrix argument which gives us readily the number of solutions. And what it turns out that if we restrict the spin to capital L, we can have at most this number of solutions from the CFT side. And what can be shown as this number is exactly equal to the number of bulk vertices with the maximum spin L. So to summarize, this is the strategy. So we restrict the bulk interactions with the maximum number of derivatives and make the corresponding restriction on the CFT side and check if the solutions are equal in number. So here is an example. So suppose we have a bulk interaction which is a 5 to the 4 interaction. So this interaction can admit only spin 0 solution. So the maximal spin on the CFT side, CFT spectrum is 0. And then for the higher derivative interactions in the bulk, so this is a 4 derivative and this is a 6 derivative interaction, one can show that with this interaction we can have at most spin 2. So spin 0 and spin 2 solutions are allowed from crossing symmetry. Now what we will see, we will now discuss is that if we go to Mellin space and take the Mellin transform of the CFT correlator, this greatly simplifies the counting. So now let's talk about how ADS locality can be derived from CFT in Mellin space. So this is the same thing in Mellin space. So what is a Mellin transform? So Mellin transform is if you have a CFT correlator, if you go to Mellin space, then it some of the symmetries are manifest. So this is like when we have flat space and we go to we take the Fourier transform where things become simpler. Similarly, when we have CFT, we go to Mellin space, and corresponding to the two cross ratios U and V, we have two Mellin variables S and T. So these are conjugate to U and V. So this is the definition of Mellin amplitude. So this is the position space amplitude, and this curly M over here, this is the Mellin amplitude. We also have some product of gamma functions over here. So I have not written the explicit form here, but we will be interested in this curly M. So why is Mellin transform useful? So it has some nice properties. So this is the Mellin amplitude, and this is how we can write the Mellin amplitude. So it has some, it involves summations over tau. So tau is the twist, which is defined as delta minus L. So instead of delta, we can use tau in the summation. So this is just a re-leveling, and we also have a sum over m, which is integer. And what is the important property is that this Mellin amplitude has, it's a meromorphic functions of the Mellin variables s and t. So only poles, no branch cuts. And this is the pole part of the Mellin amplitude, so it has poles at specific values of s, and the poles correspond to scaling dimension or the twist of the operator that is getting exchanged. And if we take the residue, we get something which is proportional to this A, which is related to the OP coefficient. And here the T dependence comes in terms of a polynomial, which is a Mach polynomial, and this polynomial is going to be very important in the derivation of locality. So this is a polynomial of T in degree L. So the bottom line is that the Mellin amplitude consists of two parts. It has a pole part which corresponds to the exchange, and it has this polynomial part which is a polynomial of the degree L, polynomial in T of degree L. Now in terms of Mellin amplitude, the crossing symmetry or the S channel and T channel equality is given by this. So this is the S channel, and we go to the T channel by just interchanging S and T. Now since we are interested in the solution to the bootstrap equation where the spin is truncated, we have to truncate this sum over spin, and it means that this Mach polynomial can at most be a polynomial in T of degree capital L. So it truncates the power of spin. So the crossing symmetry in terms of Mellin amplitude is the following. So from the S channel, we see that this Mellin amplitude is a polynomial in T with degree L, capital L, and from the T channel, this is a polynomial in S of the same degree. So what this tells us is that if these two are the same, then this Mellin amplitude must be a symmetric polynomial in both S and T of degree less equal to L. So what is the implication of the spin truncated solution? So we have seen that the poles in the Mellin amplitudes correspond to the exchange operator. So suppose we have a pole like this, so we can expand this pole in powers in S, so, and we get powers, increasing powers in S, and this is an infinite sum. So this can be resummed to give this pole. Now since we are cutting the spin to a particular value, which means that we allow these terms, but we do not allow these terms where L is from L plus 1 and onwards. So it means that this resummation is not possible, and we cannot get a pole here because we have finite number of terms. So the bottom line is that only exchange diagrams are allowed. Exchange diagrams are excluded. We have only contact fitting diagrams. So this is a bulk perspective. So these are the allowed diagrams for the spin truncated solutions, and these are ruled out. So when we go to the bulk side, we only have to compute this contact fitting diagrams. So just to give you an example how these spin truncated solutions look in Mellin space. So here is a first solution for L equals to 0. So this is a polynomial of degree 0. So this is a constant. So this is a constant. L equals to 2. This is a quadratic polynomial in S and T. So we can write down this is a generic quadratic polynomial, and these C0, C1 and C2, these are some constants that we do not know at this point. And since we are dealing with only identical scalars, no odd spin operators are allowed in the OP. So L equals to 1, 3, etc. are forbidden. And this is going to be very important when we go to de Sitter. So we can compute the Bulk-Witten diagrams and exactly reproduce these solutions up to a constant. So now let's see how these ideas can be used to study the de Sitter correlators. So we are interested in de Sitter 4, and it turns out that both de Sitter 4 and Euclidean ADS 4 can be realized as a 5-dimensional hypersurface which satisfies this relation. So this is a specific embedding, and on the right, capital R is the radius of ADS or DS. So this is minus for Euclidean ADS and plus for de Sitter. Now with this relation, we can go to a specific patch and we parameterize the Euclidean ADS or de Sitter, and here we are specifying two Poincare patch. So this is the coordinate for Euclidean ADS, and this one is for de Sitter. So here capital Z is the bulk direction, and here eta is like the time direction in de Sitter. Now in terms of the metric, this is the metric in Euclidean ADS in Poincare patch. So Z is a bulk direction which runs from 0 to infinity. X vector is the boundary direction, and this is the de Sitter version in Poincare patch where eta runs from minus infinity to 0. And the analytic continuation that takes us from Euclidean ADS to de Sitter is this. So we change Z and R by this relation, and we end up getting this de Sitter. And for the rest of my talk, we will set the radius R to be 1. So the question that we are interested in is that, so eta going to 0 is like the late time of the de Sitter geometry, and Z going to 0 is the boundary of ADS where the CFT lives. So the question is if we can have information about the late time correlators in de Sitter from the CFT.
Yeah, I think you can also infer the late time ADS and also the boundary of ADS, right?
Late time ADS?
Yes.
Yes.
So it is analog to the such case the proposal double scale SYK, because they say about the large cubing, indeed is like an exponent of the QT something. The large cube is equivalent to a large T. Do I say so?
I am not sure about this.
It's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay, so what are the observables that we compute in de Sitter? So in de Sitter, since it's a time-dependent background, we usually compute the correlation function of local operators at a fixed time. So here we have some operator Q at a fixed time T. So, and we will be specifying two in correlators. So what is the in formalism? So this is a way to compute the correlators using Schwinger-Keldysh method. So what we have is that we have an in state over here, and we evolve this in state with this interacting Hamiltonian until it encounters the operator that is in this time slice, and then we evolve it back. So there is a way to compute these correlators, and we will be using this formalism. And just to specify one thing, we will be talking about in correlators with respect to the Bunch-Davies vacuum. So this is a very specific choice. There are different vacuums in de Sitter, but we just stick to this choice. And what was shown in this series of papers is that these in correlators can be computed in terms of Witten diagrams in Euclidean ADS. So we will make use of this, and we map these correlation functions in de Sitter to Euclidean ADS. So let's begin by writing down the Lagrangian in Euclidean ADS, which computes this de Sitter correlator at late time. Okay, so here is a starting point. So we have a scalar field in de Sitter. We have one single scalar field in de Sitter. So this is very similar to what Polchinski and collaborators did, but this is in de Sitter. Now, using the shadow formalism or the things that I mentioned in the previous slide, we can map this de Sitter action to an Euclidean ADS action of two scalar fields. So we start from a single scalar field in de Sitter, we end up getting two scalar fields in Euclidean ADS. And this is not surprising that we get two scalar fields, because we have this Schwinger-Kelty contour which involves time ordered and anti-time ordered part. So,
Okay, so how do you write the Pestel rule?
sorry, what?
How do you write the Pestel rule in terms of two scalar? Because initially in the DS case, you only have one scalar defined, but how to become the defined plus and the defined plus minus?
These phi plus and phi minuses are related to the time ordered and anti-time ordered
Yeah, in the
correlation.
Lagrange I can understand, but how about measure? Pestel rule measure.
Measure.
Yeah, how do you define the measure from the weak notation, from the weak notation?
So we go, so we analytically continue the,
Yeah, Lagrange is okay.
Yes.
But how about measure? When you define Lagrange, you always need to define the Pestel ratios measure.
okay.
So how to do a weak notation to get two scalar for this d5 plus and d5 minus?
You mean this measure?
Not this measure.
Sorry.
It's whether for any particular function is equal to the integration d5.
Ah, okay, I understand your question. Yeah. I am not exactly sure how they do it.
Then how do you know that? Because what do you check? Do you check an equation motion?
Yes,
Okay, they get the same equation motion,
yes,
right?
yes.
So in this sense, in this case, you still use the measure in terms of phi. In the equivalent ADS, you use the measure in terms of phi plus and phi minus, and
Yes,
you get the equivalent
exactly.
equation motion.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So the thing is that if you start from one scalar action, you end up getting a non-trivial action between two scalars. So this is an interaction between two scalars, and this is very important. This will play a major role in what follows. And for simplicity, we restrict to a specific kind of scalars. We will be working only with conformally coupled scalars, where the scalars have the dimension 2 and 1. So this is very specific choice. Now, what is the form of this potential in Euclidean ADS? So suppose we start from this phi to the 4 interaction in de Sitter, and we do all this shadow formalism, then we end up getting this interaction in Euclidean ADS. So note that, so this is phi plus to the 4, this is phi minus to the 4, and we have specific interaction, and these numbers are fixed. So this is 1, this coefficient is 1, this is minus 6, this is plus 1. So this is something that we will talk about later, how we reproduce these numbers, okay? And we can also do add higher derivative terms, and we end up getting similar actions. So the goal now is to impose constraints on the CFT correlators that reproduce this Euclidean ADS action. So what is the CFT perspective? Now, since we have two types of CFT operators corresponding to two bulk scalars, so we have this O plus and O minus corresponding to these two scalars. So now we have the three different types of correlators. We can consider a correlator with all plus and all minus. So these are like the identical scalar correlators. But we can also have this mixed correlator, plus plus minus minus. And in turn, we can similarly have this the Mellin amplitude version of this, where we have three types of Mellin amplitude. So now the question is, what is the solution of this spin truncated bootstrap equation for these correlators?
Yeah. Can I ask something about this spin truncation?
Yes.
So now on the DS side, you start with only 5 to the 4, so you keep no other.
No, we can. This is just an example. You can also have the higher derivative terms.
Okay, but do you have to truncate again once you go to the ADS site, or is the truncation automatically kind of?
No, it's not automatic.
Okay, you have to truncate.
So now we have this CFT side. We also have to truncate.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
You made the specific choice of dimension. What would happen if the shadow operator had a dimension below the Faraday bound?
Okay, so this is still something we are not sure about. So this is something work in progress. This is a very specific example where this formalism worked. But one thing is that like we have not, so in the CFT side, we have not specifically used any unitarity condition.
Do you have any condition that you can do the spin truncation here?
Yes, I'll come to that. Yes.
But do you put any constraint to your CFT?
Yes.
What is the constraint that you can do the truncation? This is my question.
Okay. So the spin truncation constraint is the same as the one that is used in Polchinski's paper, that we have a spectrum with the scalar operators and all higher trace operators are suppressed. So we have a large n or large C expansion.
Okay, let me give one example instead. What's my question? If we consider CFT side, it's not easy to know whether the large n truncation can get just a spin 2. It's very possible to we usually have an infinite spin theory. Yeah, then in this case we cannot do a truncation.
Yes, yes.
So you must need to introduce some constraint there. One good licensing example or recent example is Dr. Stanford, Wheaton, and Jeff Lucas 2D SYK model in the large n limit. This you can define one CFT, but in this case you have an infinite high speed. You cannot do a truncation from large n.
Okay.
So in this case, I think if you just do a spin truncation in the 2D SYK CFT, you possibly get some wrong answer in your approach. I guess that's right.
I'm not sure about how this can be connected to SYK.
No, because 2D SYK is larger and lower limit, it's just CFT, same thing. If I already take such a thing, just CFT, so it must be correct. But then the question is, I'm confused about whether we can do a spin truncation there, or what. So I think you should introduce some condition to avoid such a ill-defined theory.
Yes. So what I will show later is that. So the way we do this with this spin truncated solution, this is not enough to reproduce the Euclidean action. We need some more constraint.
Yeah, but you will say later, or?
Yes, I will say this later. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this from the abstract CFT point of view. So now we have three kinds of operators. So we can. Since we have non-identical scalar OPE, O plus and O minus, we can have odd spin operators in the OPE. So it turns out that with this OPE, the crossing symmetry of the 4-point correlation function admits more solutions, than in the case of a single bulk scalar field, because odd solutions are all allowed now. So just to give you an example, so in the Lagrangian, in the potential, this term is now allowed, which where we have two derivatives of phi plus and 1 phi minus square. And one can show that this is just by using flat space Mandelstam variable arguments, that this amplitude is proportional to S, which is, if you think about this truncated solution, this is like S to the L. So this is a spin 1 interaction. So this is consistent with the fact that now we have non-identical scalars. So let's count the solutions we have. So these two are the identical scalar solutions. So this is again, these are the degree less equal to L polynomials in both S and T. So this just works exactly in Polchinski as it worked in Polchinski's and collaborators' papers. Now we have this new Mellin amplitude, which is plus plus minus minus. Now this is a polynomial which is symmetric in T and U because it's plus plus and minus minus, and we can count the number of solutions, and it turns out that this is equal to the number of monomials which satisfies this property. So this ST and U, so this counting again follows from this flat space counting. So S to the M, T, U to the N. So this is because it's symmetric in T and U. And after we do this counting, we add all the solution, all the numbers. It turns out that the number of independent solutions to crossing up to maximum spin L is given by this number. So this is a floor function which takes some maximum value of the integer L. So this is what we get from the CFT side. Now we can count the number of independent bulk vertices in the Euclidean ADS up to spin L. So we start writing down independent bulk vertices modulo the equations of motion and integration by parts, and we see that this number of solutions that we get from crossing is greater than the number of free coefficients in the Euclidean ADS action. So the bottom line here is that crossing admits more solution to this this space, and this cannot fully determine the Euclidean ADS action. So we need to impose additional constraint. So this is something that is very different. Okay, so one thing I would like to mention is about this OPE. So in the OPE of these two operators, we will now have mixing of double trace operators. For example, we can have this, in the OPE we can have these three different types of operators with these specific scaling dimensions, and you can see that these two operators have the same classical dimension 4 plus 2n plus L. So these operators mix due to quantum correction, and when we try to solve the bootstrap equation, we need to unmix them. So we use a method that was developed by these authors to unmix this. So this is just writing down mixing matrix and computing the eigenvalues of that matrix. So how do we do that? So again, we expand the CFT data in the large central charge. So this is a Mellin amplitude, this is a twist, and this is the OPE coefficient. And due to mixing, we will now have averaged anomalous dimension. So this is what appears in the crossing. So now how do we compute this data? Now since I am running out of time, I will be very sketchy. So we have a dispersion relation in Mellin space to compute the CFT data. So this is based on residue theorem, and if we do this, we end up getting this dispersion relation. So I will just skip the details, but if you are interested, you can ask me later. But one thing I would like to show that this relation gives a recursion relation for this OPE data. So the OPE data appears over here, and this is, there is a sum over n and L. So n runs from 0 to k, and L is where we truncate the spin. So the bottom line is that we can solve this equation and compute the averaged a recursion relation for this averaged anomalous dimension. Okay, so it turns out that we can solve this using the dispersion relation, and since for the 3 different correlators we have 3 different results for the OPE, and these are fixed in terms of 1 undetermined constants. So these are not fixed by symmetries. Using crossing symmetry. Okay, so that's what we have from crossing. So now, since this is not enough, we need more constraints. So this is something that is based on observation. We do not have a clear explanation why this works, but nevertheless I will mention this. So we denote the operators after unmixing as gamma plus and gamma minus, and after unmixing we impose one of these anomalous dimensions to be equal to 0. So this is just by hand we impose this constraint, and in the other OPE where we do not have any mixing, we denote this anomalous dimension by gamma pure, and finally we impose this constraint that one of this solution anomalous dimension is equal to this. So these 2 additional constraints we impose. So you may ask what is the origin of these additional constraints. So what I can say at this moment is that these additional constraints eliminate odd spin interactions and fix the bulk coefficients of the bulk interactions. So it seems that this constraints encodes the information that there was only one underlying scalar field in the original effective de Sitter action. So there cannot be odd spin solutions. So I'll very quickly tell you the results. So after we impose this additional constraint, so we initially had 3 unfixed constants. Now we impose 2 constraints. So we end up getting Mellin amplitude in terms of 1 unfixed constant. So this alpha is an unfixed constant. So this is the Mellin side, and now we can do the same computation from the bulk side. So we write down the bulk interaction vertices with generic interactions like this, and again here we have 3 unfixed coefficients, and we can compute the correlators related to these Witten diagrams. So we'll have 3 different kinds of correlators for these 3 vertex. So this one will give you the plus 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 plus, and this is the minus 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 minus, and this is the mixed one. So these computations are similar to the D functions computation, and then we take the Mellin transform of these Witten diagrams and compare the Mellin amplitude that we obtained from CFT. So this is the CFT result, and it turns out that by this comparison from between bulk and boundary, we can have this interaction. So this is the interaction that I have shown previously, that it has to have specific numbers. This is +1, this is -6, and this is +1. So only after imposing this additional constraint, we can reproduce the bulk effective vertex. So let me summarize. So what we have seen is that bulk locality in de Sitter can be understood using the boundary CFT correlators, and there is a map that takes us from de Sitter to Euclidean ADS, and once we go to Euclidean ADS, we can think of a dual CFT, and then we study the CFT using crossing symmetry, and the bottom line is that crossing symmetry admits many more terms in the Euclidean ADS Lagrangian, but only a subset of these terms can arise upon rotation from de Sitter. So with these additional constraints and crossing, we can reconstruct the bulk action. So some future works, so here we have considered a very specific set of correlators, conformally coupled scalars. So the next thing would be to do this for massless scalars. The most important thing is what is the implication of this additional constraint. As of now, we have no good argument why this works, but only one thing is that we start from a single scalar field, so all the odd spin operators has to be 0, but could there be any symmetry based argument? So it would be nice to understand it from the symmetry perspective. And here we talked about only contact Witten diagrams. There could be tree level or tree level exchange or loop diagrams. And finally, we have this is a very specific model of a CFT where there is no stress tensor. So it would be interesting to generalize this to gravitational theories in the bulk. So I should stop here. Thank you.
More questions for
It looks like your potential with the phi plus and phi minus fields is not bounded. Is that correct? It can go off to plus or minus infinity.
Go to what? Sorry?
The potential for your phi plus and phi minus fields is not bounded. Is that worrying that you have this unbounded potential for this field theory?
I don't think so.
You don't think it's worrying?
No. This okay. So one thing is about that phi plus and phi minus. This is, I mean, we do not know why this prescription works. So there could be some more symmetry that underlines this argument, because finally the constraint that we impose, that is related to the vanishing of an anomalous dimension. So it could be possible that there is something more to it.
A second question is, can you give us some intuition about why you choose different scaling dimensions for phi plus and phi minus? I mean, naively coming from de Sitter, you might have chosen just one. Why do they need to have different scaling dimensions, phi plus and phi minus?
So this is a particular choice. You mean this conformally coupled scalars?
Yeah. Is there some intuition why you should choose this
This is the simplest case that we could do.
I would have said the simplest is to choose the same dimension for both scalars.
No, that we cannot do, because I mean, there is this dimension, and it will have to have, so once we choose one, the other one is fixed. So it's in 3 dimensions, so if one is 2, the other one has to be 1.
Why?
So these are like the shadow fields.
Why make that choice? Why not choose them both to be 2?
We cannot choose that, because that is fixed from this constraint on this scale dimension.
Where does that constraint come from?
So that constraint comes from that you have this relation between the scaling dimension and mass of the bulk state. So the scaling dimension of the CFT operator is related to the mass, and this is a quadratic equation.
Sure, but I still don't understand why you make this particular. I mean, it seems like a choice to me that you choose one to have one scaling dimension and the other to have the other.
But once you choose one dimension, you cannot. I mean, the other one is automatically fixed, no?
Why? Why isn't it a choice? What? I don't understand. Where does that come from? Your particular action. Why can't I just choose 2 scalars of the same scaling dimension?
Okay, so the action that we have, this is derived from a de Sitter action.
That's what I'm asking for. Where does the intuition come from that you need these 2 different scalars?
Okay, so one thing is that like you have to have 2 different scalars, because this it comes from this Schwinger-Keldy thing where you have time-ordered and anti-time ordered propagator. So that's that tells us that you have to have two different things on both the contours. Does that answer your question?
No.
No?
Other questions? Maybe I have one question. So in the end, you end up with very particular constraints on the CFT side. So you say that anomalous dimensions have to be 0, but at each level of n and l, you have to have one that is 0, right?
Yes.
So this would lead to a lot of protected operators.
Yes.
in
So
your
that's
theory. So do you know of a theory that
no.
will satisfy
That's still something we do not know. So at this point, we know that it works, but other than that, we do not have any symmetry-based argument. Why do we need to have this?
Final question? If not, let's thank Parisa.